Hello and welcome to this month's Breaking Barriers LinkedIn Live, brought to you by Shape Talent. My name is Rachel Schofield. I'm one of the senior facilitators with Shape Talent, and every month we invite you, whether you are an HR professional, head of people, EDI lead for your organization, we invite you to join us in an in-depth conversation on one of the big topics around gender equity. And my goodness me, joining me today is our CEO and founder, Sharon Peake. Hi, Sharon. Good to see you.
Hello, nice to see you again.
And we're going deep. We're going for the jugular this month because we have chosen as our topic EDI in uncertain times, when doing the right thing gets complicated. And my goodness me, has it got complicated? We are in turbulent times, and a big question for many organizations on EDI is, should we be holding the line or pulling back? There are shifting political landscapes. President Trump in the US, of course, very busy in this space. There are mounting external pressures, therefore, for organizations, businesses we know from our lived experience facing very tough choices about their EDI commitment. So over the next half an hour, Sharon and I will be talking about this topic, going deep into what we're seeing and thinking about practical ways forward, whether people are thinking about how do we handle this? What do we say, both internally and externally? Should we all be thoroughly depressed? Is there a way forward? We're going to tackle all of those issues. So stay with us. And as I say, join the conversation. The chat is there for you, whether you are watching with us live or catching up. We always keep a really good eye on the chat. There'll be a chance at the end for questions to Sharon as well. But before we start, let's get used to using the chat. I would love, actually, from curiosity, from our point of view, we love to get a sense of what's happening for you. So if you are able, we would love you in the chat to let us know how your organization, your business has so far responded to what's happening around EDI, particularly the kind of anti-EDI rhetoric we're seeing. Have you perhaps made a statement, whether internally, externally? Are you doubling down, thinking we're hunkering in, we're going for the long term? Or are you thinking we need to row back? Or finding something in between? Do use the chat. Sharon and I will keep an eye on that because I'd be really interested to see what you are experiencing. But we are very aware that there are significant challenges. So we wanted to bust some myths, think about the practicalities, see what the landscape really looks like. So Sharon, great to dig into this with you. And I'm going to go straight in and say, is this the end for EDI? Is EDI dead?
No, Rachel, I don't think it is dead. I think there are some that would like it to be dead. But as I was reflecting on this over the last couple of days, I've been thinking that EDI, or DEI as others know it, we prefer to emphasize the E for equity and call it EDI. EDI has been around for a long time. Back in the 90s, I first got exposure to this. It was called EEO then, Equal Employment Opportunities. And it's gone through lots of iterations over the years: diversity and inclusion, inclusion and diversity, DEI, DEIB with belonging at the end. So it's been around for a very long time. And at the heart of EDI or DEI is fairness. Everyone wants to work in a workplace that is fair, where they have equitable opportunities and access to opportunities. So I don't think the need for this is going to go away. What I do think has happened recently is there's been a lot of bad press about EDI. I think maybe over the last few years, we've seen practices stray a little from evidence-based solutions to other things that haven't always delivered. And so it's given the industry a bit of bad name. So I think it is time for a reset. So I don't think it's dead, but I do think it needs a reset.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that. And thanks, Neris, I can see in the chat says we're pushing ahead with our agenda. Really interesting to hear that. But we appreciate that sometimes that pushing ahead might look a little bit different, as you say, Sharon, with a bit of a reset. But let's drill down then a little bit into some of the key issues or the concerns that you're seeing. And I know this has a different bent, probably, depending on where people are in the world.
Yeah, it definitely does. And so it's worth saying something about that because the issues are very, very different around the world. So it's very different in the US to what's happening in Europe. And of course, we work with a lot of multinationals who operate across Europe, across the US. And so they're kind of caught out in this state of confusion, in some cases inertia, not knowing what to do because the issues are so different. So let's talk about what the issues are. So let's start with the US, because that's really what's catalyzed this conversation in the last couple of months. So it was Trump's 3 executive orders in January that really spurred the discussion that we're having now. There'd been a build up to this for a while, but it was that spurred a lot of the immediate reaction from organizations. So just as a reminder for anyone that's listening that isn't aware, there were 3 executive orders that President Trump signed in January around DEI, as he refers to it. So one affected federal employees, government employees in the US. Second affected federal contractors, so anyone that has a contract with the federal government, which, by the way, stretches further than you might think. I was having dinner with my neighbour across the road the other night, and he runs a very small family building company. Part of what they do is the maintenance work for US embassies in London. So this is a suburban builder who does some maintenance contracts for US embassy offices, or houses, I should say, in London. He had to sign a declaration because he is technically a federal contractor to the US government. He had to sign a declaration saying that he didn't have in place any DEI policies or practices. So that federal contractor executive order does spread a bit further than you might think. You might think it's just American companies. It's not. And then the 3rd executive order actually touched the private sector. Now, there's a limit here legally as to what any government can do in the private sector, but actually what this executive order was about saying, if you, in the private sector, are doing any of this DEI stuff, we're going to be looking very closely. We're going to identify the top 9 worst offenders, and the Attorney General will have the power to come after you and to instigate lawsuits against you. On what, I'm not entirely clear. And in fact, those 3 executive orders are currently under review. So they have been challenged legally. We don't yet know the outcome of it. But the very nature of them being announced in January has meant that lots of organizations don't quite know how to respond. And they're very, very fearful, understandably, of putting a step wrong and creating undue attention, unhelpful attention on themselves. So that's what's happening in the US. So for US companies, for companies operating in the US, there are these executive orders that they need to navigate. And we'll see in the coming months how these play out in the legal system and whether they're held up or not. The other thing in the US, of course, that we shouldn't forget about is there are already anti-discrimination laws, the statute that has been around for a very long time that remains in place. So there are still laws that companies need to adhere to that say you can't discriminate on the basis of protected characteristics. So on the one hand, you've got executive orders saying you can't do any DEI stuff, which is what it should be, keeping workplaces fair and equitable. On the other hand, you've got laws that say you have to be fair and equitable to your employees. So there's some kind of conflicting tensions in the US. But contrast that with Europe. Yeah. In Europe, you've got a very pro DEI stance generally, kind of philosophically and in terms of statute and regulation. So the EU has a number of directives across EU member states that, in our case, because we're interested in gender equity, that impact gender. So you've got the Women on Boards Directive. You need to hit targets of women on boards. You've got the Equal Pay Transparency Directive. You've got a newer directive, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which has a DEI, EDI component to it. So these are all things that are mandating that organizations do stuff in the DEI space. So it's very, very different to the US. If we look at the UK, you've got more employer protections. The Worker Protection Act was brought into force not that long ago in the UK. So there's strengthened protections for employees. There's strengthened protections around sexual harassment. The Labour government made a commitment to ending the gender pay gap once and for all. They're extending gender pay gap reporting to ethnicity. They're looking at disability as well. So you've got lots of regulation that is very pro DEI. And you've also got governments standing up. The French government, the German government have stood up recently and said, whatever's going on in the US, it doesn't apply to us. We are standing firm. We believe DEI is important, so we're going to continue with this. So completely different context. And perhaps the other thing to mention, the final thing, is of course, we have the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. So the UN member states signed up to these SDGs back in 2015. It sets these aspirational targets for 2030. One of them is around gender equality. So you've got member states that have signed up to be committed to that. We had CSW, the Commission for the Status of Women, the once a year UN get together on the status of gender equality. All member states, all UN member states, including the US, signed up to that 4-year commitment around gender equality. So you've got very conflicting messages around the world at the moment. But basically, I think there's a lot of inertia, a lot of confusion because of these conflicting messages, particularly if you're a multinational organization trying to navigate all of this.
Yeah. Really helpful to have that kind of overview, particularly at kind of government level and country level. What's interesting to me as well, though, and I think why people are also struggling, is because there feels like the debate has gone into wider society as well, that there's a sense of EDI is now a bad thing among some areas of the population. I wonder if you can sort of myth bust for us a little bit, because we're sort of adopting this idea that, oh my gosh, there's this massive backlash. Is that really true?
Well, yes and no. So let's have a look at what's going on in society. There is definitely, I think the pendulum in public perception has swung the other way. So we were making good progress if we talk about gender equity, because that, of course, that's what we're most concerned with. There was progress being made. It wasn't as fast as we would have liked, but there was progress being made. That has officially stalled. In the last couple of years, progress has stalled, and actually we're now at risk of going backwards. At the same time, you've got this public sentiment that believes that we've achieved gender equality. So the reality is we haven't. If you look at objective measures of this, so the one that we often look at is the World Economic Forum. They do a prediction every year based on 4 measures of gender equality around the world: labour, participation, health, education, political representation. They come up with an estimate of how long it's going to take to achieve gender equality. According to them, we're 134 years away. So about 5 generations. So we are nowhere near done. But there is this perception that we're done. So about a year ago, Ipsos, in conjunction with King's College London, did a survey of 31 countries around the world on attitudes towards gender equality. And basically what they found was almost half of the population surveyed think that not only have we kind of done enough for gender equality, but we've gone too far now. So think about that. Half the population thinks it's gone too far, but we're still 5 generations away from true equality. So there's a real disconnect between perception and reality.
Yeah. And in a way, that's the real challenge, isn't it? That trying to sort of correct that narrative, trying to bring people with you, trying to keep communicating that. Really interesting. And in the meantime, as you say, for multinationals, they're juggling a lot of big questions about what do they do with their policies, you know, how do they have to rewrite stuff, what's the narrative. So take us to the coalface, Sharon, because obviously we as a team are meeting with multinationals regularly. What are you seeing some of these big organizations starting to do to adapt, maybe to reset, as you said earlier?
Well, the one thing I might just add to that point before I talk about what organizations are doing is some of the perception of what's going on, which will link to what organizations are doing and why they're doing it. So I think there is a perception linked to this perception that we've done too much, we've gone too far. There are large swathes of people, particularly men, who feel that they've been left behind. There is a perception, and I'm hearing it anecdotally in comments that go along the lines of, well, I just want to be appointed on the basis of merit. I think it's about the best person being appointed to the job, which I have to say I couldn't agree more with. That is the whole purpose, really, of EDI, DEI, to make sure that the best person is appointed for the job and to eliminate the structural barriers that stop that from happening currently. So there is a perception that people are getting prioritized or preferential treatment in recruitment or promotion. And I just want to say something about that. A couple of terms that some of our audience will already be familiar with, some may not. So the difference between positive action and positive discrimination. So positive discrimination is a concept around the world that is mostly illegal. There are a few countries where it is legal, but mostly illegal and certainly discouraged. And it's where someone is given preferential treatment based on a particular characteristic. So if I was applying for a job, it would, and competing against a man, it would be me getting appointed just because I'm a woman. So that is positive discrimination, and it is unlawful in the UK, in the US, in Europe, in many countries around the world. Contrast that with positive action, which is recognizing there are structural and systemic barriers that stop some groups from being equally represented. So whether it be on the basis of gender or race and ethnicity or religion or disability or whatever. Positive action is about leveling the playing field. So it's things like having recruitment campaigns that might target underrepresented groups, making sure they've got more opportunity to see the ad, more opportunity to apply to the ad. It might be things like the women's development programs that we run that are for women, that address the structural barriers that women face. It doesn't guarantee them a job, but it just gives them more tools to navigate the system. So positive action is generally legal, not only legal, but encouraged by most governments around the world, including in the UK and in Europe. So positive action will be having things like aspirational targets for underrepresented groups. So companies saying we might want to have 50% women in leadership by 2030 or whatever the date is. So an aspirational target is positive action. A quota where you must fill it is positive discrimination, and that's unlawful. So I just want to distinguish the two, because if people are worried about positive discrimination, then actually complain, make a big deal. This is unlawful, it shouldn't be happening, and no one in the EDI community wants that to happen. But positive action is something that we should be holding on to and guarding very carefully. So what am I seeing organizations do in the context of all of this, the geopolitical context, the positive action versus positive discrimination? Well, I'm seeing a lot of inertia, I think, is the first thing. I'm seeing confusion, particularly for organizations operating cross borders, because it was simple up until a few months ago. Generally speaking, the rules were the same around the world in most countries in which companies are operating, but now they're quite different. So if you've got a global matrixed organization with operations in the US, you've got to if you want to comply with the executive orders, if they are upheld, you've got to not do any EDI, DEI programs, but at the same time, you've got to make sure people aren't discriminated against unlawfully. And you want to make sure your people feel safe, secure, valued, engaged, in order to be happy and productive. So it's really difficult. So we're seeing a couple of things. We're seeing some organizations restructure, scale back, stop their DEI programs. A great example was Accenture, who sent an email to all employees saying, basically, the job is done. We've done the DEI stuff. We're going to stop all of our programs. I don't agree with that at all, but we are seeing companies take those bold actions. Arguably, you could say that some of the companies doing this are the ones that maybe were doing it in a performative way. I don't know if that was the case for Accenture, but some of them it's an easy excuse to stop something they didn't believe in anyway. So we're seeing a little bit of that. I will say it's the minority, though. The way that you see it represented in the media would make it feel like and sound like it's loads of companies, it's the majority, and it's not. There was a survey I managed to get my hands on that was done at the end of January, so after the executive orders, a couple of months ago now, that said the number of companies that are stopping their DEI programs was 5% of respondents, and the number that are kind of reducing their spend was 8%. So that's only 13%. I think it was 12.5% overall that are either stopping or scaling back. So it is still the minority. It's not the majority that you might expect, but we are seeing some of that. We're also seeing the opposite. We're speaking to clients, companies who are doubling down. They're redoubling their efforts. They're making public statements to say they're committed to this. They've decided that this is the moment to show what their values are. You know, one of our clients, Beiersdorf, has said very publicly, this is about our values. We are not changing course. We continue. I saw a lovely video from the CEO of Canon in Germany saying exactly the same thing. BT have made statements, Procter & Gamble, Apple, Sephora, lots of companies have said, actually, we are staying the course. Some US companies, some European headquarters. And if we look at the UK, I saw a survey by the IOD, the Institute of Directors, that said 71% of UK businesses have no intention of altering their EDI strategies. So actually, some are scaling back, but a lot are staying the course, I think, are the headlines here.
I guess some companies are sort of trying to do both, but more subtly. So perhaps they're keeping some of the same ideas, but they're having to kind of give them different names or put them somewhere else in the business.
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing some of that. So I've been watching job titles change on LinkedIn, for example. And so they're, you know, I've noticed a handful. I'm not going to say this is definitely a trend, but I'm noticing the word equity being dropped from job titles. So whereas you might have had a group head of diversity, equity and inclusion, they might now be a head of global culture and inclusion, or a head of inclusion, or I saw one the other day, head of talent management and engagement. So I think the word equity is being dropped from job titles. Presumably there's a knock-on effect for programs as well. And the other thing that we're seeing, that last job title infers that we're seeing a bit of a shift into talent management. We're seeing EDI moving into talent management. I've seen reporting lines go into talent management. I've seen jobs that have been made redundant and merged into talent management. And I think there is an opportunity here. I mean, a lot of the moments that matter around EDI happen in talent management processes. They happen in attraction, recruitment, development, promotion, succession planning. So it kind of makes sense that you merge it into talent management, but there is a real caveat here. There's a real watch out, which is don't just merge it in name only. So if you're not doing the hard work to embed this systemically, culturally, and it takes quite a high level of maturity in EDI to be able to embed it fully. If you haven't done that work, then it's probably not going to stick. So I worry about it just being a job consolidation exercise and not actually achieving the end goals.
Yeah. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you more about that in a minute. Just to say, if you've just joined us, we would love to know, Neris in the chat mentioned that they're pushing ahead with their agenda. In the light of what Sharon has been saying about what we're noticing organizations do share in the chat if you're able to, or contact us afterwards. We'd love to know what your organization is doing. Any changes that you've made structurally or philosophically, really interesting to us. But you mentioned there, Sharon, the risks that come up as people sort of navigate some of these changes, think about doing things differently. What do you think are some of those caveats where people might get stuff a little bit wrong, or indeed things that they need to be aware of as they are navigating this new space?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there are three risks. I think there's a risk around culture, there's a risk around compliance, and there's a risk around reputation and employer brand. So if we start with culture, my worry now is what's happening, particularly in the US, is incredibly destabilizing for minoritized groups. More than ever, I'm hearing people talk about how they're worried about the safety of their employees. We're hearing about the rise of incivility in the workplace, kind of just nastiness and unprofessional behavior towards others. Of course, in society, we know that hate crimes have been on the rise for some groups. We know that there's been the rise of the manosphere, the incel movement when it comes to gender equality over the last few years. There's just a lot of polarization of views in society. Of course, society is represented in workplaces. So you've got people on both sides of the spectrum with the rise of incivility. So I think there's a risk around culture, around engagement, satisfaction, sense of belonging, sense of inclusion. All of that is a risk. And so I worry about that. And I think that's something that organizations absolutely have to prioritize. How do you make sure your workforce feels safe, they feel supported, they feel trusted, and that they feel engaged? You know, nobody wants a workforce that's kind of spending half the time looking for another job because they don't feel they belong anymore. So culture is a risk. I think compliance is a risk. If you're a multinational, you've got to comply with these executive orders. If they are upheld, and we don't know whether they will be or not yet, if they are upheld, how do you comply with those? You can't have DEI programs, but you have to make sure no one's being discriminated against. So DEI programs are kind of one of the avenues for ensuring that. So there's a risk of a rise in lawsuits around discrimination if there aren't checks and balances there. And then how do you square that with what you're doing in other parts of the business? So I've had clients say to me, you know, we don't want different rules for the US. We want everyone to benefit from our programs. We don't have to segment them off. So I think there's a real compliance risk here that needs very careful attention. And then the third risk, I think, is around reputation and employer brands. So employers need workforces that are engaged and happy. More than ever, there is a competition for the best talent. And so there is a real risk that organizations that drop these commitments are going to lose large swathes of talent who don't feel included and don't feel a sense of belonging anymore. So a great opportunity for those that are staying the course to scoop up the best talent, actually. But I think reputationally, there's a medium-term risk of employers doing themselves harm if they get this wrong, if they're seen to be dropping things that the workforce really wants and values. I think they're going to create an unhelpful employer brand as somewhere not to work, frankly. So I think it needs to be managed not just at a compliance level, and I'm seeing lots of companies manage it just at a compliance level, but it needs to be, organizations need to think about the culture risks and the branding and reputational risks as well.
Yeah. I really like what you said there about opportunities, that risk of damage to your brand could also be an opportunity to be one of those people who says, actually, you know, this is important to us, this underpins our values, this makes us an appealing place to work. So there's an opportunity in that. I'd love to finish by talking a little bit more about opportunities, because as you said, from your point of view, EDI is not dead, but things are shifting. So for organizations that want to stay committed to EDI, but who are aware they're going to need to adapt to this changing landscape, what do you think are some of the opportunities, the ways forward?
Yeah, I think the very first opportunity is to support your people. So there are lots of people in organizations, particularly in the US, but not just in the US, who are feeling nervous right now with this anti-DEI stance. So I think there's an opportunity to listen to people, ask people how they're feeling, listen to what they have to say, respond to what they have to say, make them feel supported. So that could be through listening circles, listening groups. We run those all the time for clients. It could be through your ERGs, your employee resource groups. They can be a really invaluable support mechanism here at this time. So making sure they've got the resources, they've got the support, they've got the time to support their members. Supporting the exec team. So we've been doing workshops and coaching with executive teams who need the language and the tools to navigate these conversations. There's no avoiding it. This is almost every conversation we have at the moment starts with the question of, you know, what's going on in the world and how are you responding to the geopolitics of it. These conversations are happening in workplaces everywhere, and not every executive feels equipped to manage them. So giving them some support. And then finally, your EDI and HR teams, who are the pointy end of all of this. How can you support them to make sure they've got the tools, they've got the emotional support to be able to navigate what is a really, really challenging time for them? We've just stood up a program, which in fact we're running our first one, an open program in a couple of weeks' time, Equity Compass group coaching, where we pull teams together to problem solve together, to kind of come up with solutions together and to support each other. So I think number one is supporting your people at all levels. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think because if we look at the US, you've still got anti-discrimination laws. So multinationals who are having to navigate the compliance of all of this still need to make sure you've got fair workplaces that don't have bias in them. I think work de-biasing processes is really important now, because that's your protection to make sure, without any DEI programs in the US, that you're not inadvertently breaching anti-discrimination laws. So having a look at your recruitment process, having a look at your development process, performance, salary review, succession planning, making sure there are no bias. There is no bias in those processes. Usually there is. We've got our own de-bias audit that we do for companies, and even the biggest, most robust companies with sophisticated HR teams will have some inadvertent bias if you haven't updated your policies in a few years. It happens. You know, my favorite example of this is the tendency that lots of multinationals have to make sure you have at least one woman on a short list to, you know, make sure that you're trying to even the playing field. The research tells us if you only have one woman, or one of any one kind of underrepresented group, their chances of being appointed are next to zero. And the reason for that is when you're the only one, you stand out and you're kind of easily discounted. When there's two of you, doesn't matter how many people are on the short list, whether it's 4 or 8 or 10, when you have more than one, the chances of being appointed rise exponentially. So stuff like that, which you think is well-intended, it certainly is well-intended, can carry bias as well. So support your people, de-bias your processes. And then the other thing I would say is leveling the playing field. So I go back to positive action here. I predict there's going to be much more emphasis on inclusion. Inclusion is not a dirty word in the way that equity is in the US. And inclusion is really, really important. However, it's not enough by itself. You've also got to address for the structural imbalances that mean that some people just haven't had access to jobs, whether that be women, whether that be underrepresented ethnicities and so forth. So you've got to have programs that help accelerate certain groups of people. And you can do that in fair and equitable ways. So we run a women's development program. There are different ways that, you know, we can make that fair and accessible. A lot of our clients are continuing with them. They're keeping them as women's development programs. We've had one client, however, that said, I want to open it up to everyone of all genders. Men, women, non-binary people, everyone can come. So it's still based, it's designed as a program that dismantles the barriers that women face, but everyone can come along and participate. So that's one way of responding. The other way of responding is to introduce a selection process where applicants for those kind of programs have to put forward their case for why they should be accepted. And so you could ask them to describe their motivation for joining a program that is designed to address the systemic barriers for women. Now, it doesn't mean that men or non-binary people shouldn't be included, but they've got to explain why they support that objective and why it's relevant to them. And by the way, that's the approach that US universities are using to get around the selection prohibition around particularly prioritizing underrepresented ethnicities. So they're asking people as part of the process to write applications and essays. So people can choose what they write about, of course. But it's open to everyone. So there are ways of doing positive action programs, but making them fair and equitable. So I think that is the other thing that organizations should be doing. So supporting their people, de-biasing processes, accelerating talent, and then kind of maybe to finish with, this is the time to redefine EDI. I think my worry at the moment is that there is a risk that this is going to be a compliance-driven response. So every conversation I had invariably involves the EDI head saying, yeah, I've been chatting to our US lawyers about what we do in the US, and that is absolutely the right thing to do. Absolutely. It is a really, really crucial input. You can't make decisions without a really clear understanding of the legal implications. However, that accounts for one of the 3 risks that I talked about. That accounts for the compliance risk. It doesn't account for the culture risk or the branding risk. So you also need leaders, HR leaders, EDI leaders to be standing up and looking at ways to counteract those other risks. It can't just be compliance led. So I guess my call today for people listening who are in the EDI space, who are HR leaders, is this is your time to stand up and redefine what EDI is. These opportunities don't come around that often, so please make your voice heard so that we can redefine this in a way that works for everyone and doesn't diminish EDI.
Love that. A brilliant call to action to wrap us up, because we are at time. I'm mindful that I haven't even got to questions, but I'm keeping an eye on the chat. There is a moment, if you need it, to use the chat there. In fact, yes, I think there is a question in the comments that is, what message are organizations sending to young people, Sharon, about to enter the workforce? This is really interesting, isn't it? The generational divide that's coming around about this. And I guess that again, this comes down to branding, to values, to culture, that organizations have to think carefully about the message they're sending out to young people who are about to join work, perhaps for the first time, or maybe just their second or third role.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question. And it's so important for organizations to be thinking about this. What is the message they're sending to prospective employees about whether they're a good place to work? Every action that they take in this EDI space sends a message, intended or otherwise. It sends a message that is going to resonate or not resonate with your prospective candidates. So, you know, I think the message being sent depends entirely on the organization. But for those that are dropping this like a hot potato, then I think there's a really negative message. Really negative message that will have medium-term impacts for their brand as the next generation just say, actually, I don't think that's a place that's aligned with my values. I'll look for a job elsewhere. I think they're going to find in a few years' time, they're going to struggle to really attract talent if that's the course of action that they're set on. For those organizations that are standing firm and saying, actually, we want to get the best from everyone. We want to make sure we're creating fair workplaces for everyone. I think that's a wonderful, encouraging sign for prospective employees. I would be jumping at that if I was seeing the CEO shouting about that quite publicly, as some already have been. So there's a real message to prospective candidates that can't be ignored here.
Absolutely. An opportunity, as we say, that EDI is not dead, it's being redefined, but you want to be part of that conversation. You want to be at the forefront and really intentional about how you and your organization are responding to it. Sharon, thank you so much. I work with you and I learn so much from you on these conversations. It's absolutely fantastic. Your knowledge is encyclopedic. The insights you provide are so valuable, and the practical approaches so useful to people who watch. We know from the feedback that people come away with loads of notes and things they can implement. But it's worth me, just as we wrap up, saying two things. Sharon mentioned already our Equity Compass group coaching. This is about staying the course in a shifting landscape. And we would love to invite you, if you are an EDI, a talent, a people leader, and you would like to join this conversation, we are going to be looking through group coaching at the challenges of gender equity in today's changing landscape. If that's something you are interested in, it's happening on Thursday, the 15th of May. It's a morning session, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. UK time. And if you reach out to Sharon here on LinkedIn or to Shape Talent, you'll find our company page as well to register your interest and apply. We would be delighted to hear from you, because it is a really powerful conversation. And as you said, Sharon, we love to work in this coaching space as well and facilitate conversations, because there's so much wisdom to be gained from working with people who are specialists in their field and who can work together to figure out some of this. The other thing, if you are wanting to go deeper on EDI in uncertain times, is our webinar on that very topic, which is going to be a review of different paths that organizations are taking. That is another date for your diary. Grab your phone now or a pen and paper. That is happening on Wednesday, the 4th of June at 10 a.m. UK time. There's going to be a link magically dropping in the chat, I hope, courtesy of my colleague Becky, and you can just register for that. So the group coaching is something you are welcome to apply for. We would love to invite you to register your interest in that, or just the webinar. Do come along. You can register straight away and secure your place. It's the start of a bigger conversation, and we invite you to be part of it. As Sharon said, it's an opportunity as well as something that is causing people a headache and is a little bit of a fearful space, but there is also this massive conversation going on that will allow us to redefine EDI. Please be part of it with us. If you have a question, connect with Sharon on LinkedIn, keep in touch with us, get stuck into the chat. We always follow up afterwards. We keep an eye on what happens, but we're delighted that you joined us today, and we will look forward to seeing you next month for May's Breaking Barriers LinkedIn Live. Thanks, Sharon, and thanks everyone for joining. Bye-bye.
So much.